Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. This has to be a joke, right? Well, actually, it's not. I have been doing 1 set to failure per exercise for the majority of my training career. And so today I'm going to explain the reasoning behind why this way of training works and why I do it. Before I start this video, I just want to say, brace yourself, because this is going to be controversial for most people, to say the least. And it's almost definitely going to ruffle some feathers, and people are almost definitely going to get mad in the comments and call me names and stuff. And if people want to use the fact that I'm not huge or call me small to discredit what I'm saying, then I can't stop them, and that's fine. I can't force anyone to trust what I'm saying. But what I can do is provide proof of what I'm saying in the form of studies and stuff like that, which I am going to do. I would really appreciate if you just sat down and watched this video with an open mind and try to not be too emotionally attached to what you already believe to be true. So before we even talk about why I only do 1 set to failure, we first have to define what failure actually is. Muscular failure, or momentary muscular failure as the proper term is when you are physically incapable of continuing the exercise in the prescribed manner with the correct form. The correct form being, with the correct range of motion, the correct path of movement, and the correct body positioning. When you are unable to continue the positive portion or the concentric portion, the lifting phase of the exercise with correct form, you have reached or achieved momentary muscular failure. But there's a lot of things that people think is momentary muscular failure, but actually isn't. Here's a couple of them. Momentary muscular failure is not when you are unable to continue the exercise in spite of loosening your form. It is not when you are unwilling to continue the exercise because of the extreme amount of discomfort that you may be feeling. And it is not when you are unable to keep the cadence that you have decided to use for that exercise. Again, momentary muscular failure is when you are physically incapable of continuing the exercise with the correct form. Another important thing though is, when you first start training this way, you don't want to start to go to failure immediately. Just like you shouldn't go to failure immediately when you first start training like a complete beginner in the gym. Because you first want to focus on learning to do the exercises with the correct form. So I would take the first couple of weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, or maybe even more depending on how much you feel that you need, to learn to perform the exercises that you are doing with perfect form. And then you can start to gradually increase the intensity until you are working as hard as you possibly can to failure. Now, also another important thing to note regarding failure is that failure is something that you learn to train to. You won't just be able to say, okay, I'm training to failure now, and then you train all the way to failure as hard as you possibly can. Because training with intensity, training really, really hard is something that you learn to do. Because even if you know that, failure isn't when you feel, that you mentally can't push through the pain anymore. And by the way, you shouldn't feel pain, but I mean discomfort. You still probably will quit before failure because of the discomfort a couple of times, or maybe a lot of times, before you actually learn how to push through that discomfort and actually train all the way to failure. And so if you are someone who is very, receptive to that discomfort, or who feels that discomfort of, that burn is very, very hard for you to work through, all I can say is, the more you try to work through it, the better you will get at working through it, until you eventually get the kind of pain tolerance that you need in order to be working through that discomfort so you can get all the way to failure. By the way, just to give you some perspective, it took me probably like a year for me to learn how to train to failure correctly and how to actually get to failure all the way. Because there were so many points in my training career when I was sure I was training as hard as I possibly could, and I was sure I was training all the way to failure. But the more time went on and the more I learned, and the better I got at training to failure, which is, like I said, something that you learn. It's kind of like a skill. Training hard is a skill. The more I learned, the better I got at training to failure, the more I realized that what I've been doing before wasn't training to failure at all. I was maybe a couple of reps short, or I wasn't doing the exercise correctly, so the fatigue wasn't as deep, so I was getting a bunch of rest, while I was doing the exercise, because I was maybe, pausing at the bottom and just letting go of the weight, just letting the weight rest and letting my muscles recover and stuff like this. But when you actually do this correctly, the amount of fatigue and the way it feels after just doing one set is something that, you know, you will have never experienced before. When you get to that point where you can perform a set to failure correctly, most people will go, oh shit, I get it now. Because most people, when they imagine, you know, someone doing one set to failure, they imagine the way that they do a set to failure. And the way most people do a set to failure, which most people don't even do it to failure, because most people who say they train to failure don't know how to train to failure, and they don't train to failure. They imagine the way they train to failure, and the way they train to failure is shit. They're not good at training to failure. Most people are not good at training to failure. It's very, very hard for most people to learn how to properly train to failure and how to properly perform a set. Now, I'm not going to talk way too much about how you want to perform a proper set to failure in this video, because I am going to be posting another video probably after this one about how you perform a set to failure this way that I'm talking about properly. Now, the reason I only do one set to failure and why I say you only need to do one set to failure if you do it properly is because one properly performed set, performed to true momentary muscular failure, will have recruited and therefore stimulated all of the available motor units in the target muscle group. And this was proven back in the 70s or 80s, I believe, by Dr. Elwood Henneman, who coined the Henneman's size principle of motor unit recruitment. And so again, why do we go to failure? Because it ensures that we have recruited and therefore stimulated all of the available muscle fibers in the target muscle groups. Now, you have probably heard of this way of training from people like Mike Menzer, Arthur Jones, maybe you come across Jay Vincent or Drew Bay or Dr. Doug McGuff or someone else who preaches this kind of training, and it usually goes under the name of HIIT training. But I don't like that word because, to be honest, and this is going to, you know, make probably a lot of people upset because I will probably sound pretty arrogant when I say this, but really it should just be called proper exercise, because it is the proper way to exercise. It is the safest, the most efficient, and a lot of times the most effective way to exercise. Now, does this mean that all other training approaches that people do suck and do not work at all? No. But all I am saying is that this is the most safe, the most efficient, and a lot of the times the most effective way to exercise. That doesn't mean that you can't make progress on other training approaches. This is just a truly evidence-based and physiology-based approach to training, which, when applied correctly with the correct volume and frequency that fits the individual, will always work to stimulate muscle strength and size increases for everybody. Now, of course, there are some exceptions for when you shouldn't go to failure, such as, for example, if you're a beginner, you should not go to failure because the threshold for, you know, stimulating the muscle growth process is usually a lot lower, and so you won't need to go to momentary muscular failure in order to see the best gains. And also, you shouldn't go to momentary muscular failure because when you're a beginner, it's more important to focus on learning to perform the lifts that you are doing properly with correct form instead of pushing as hard as you can and going all the way to failure. And also, for example, if you have a pre-existing injury, which, you know, you should stop the exercise not when you reach failure, you should stop the exercise instead when you start feeling something that could potentially indicate that you are aggravating that pre-existing injury, or something that could indicate that you are causing an injury. Now, with that out of the way, I know what a lot of you are probably thinking. Well, this is very low volume. Don't you need volume to, you know, build muscle optimally? Well, let me tell you, this way of training, actually, when you do it properly, is not low volume at all. The reason a lot of you think this is low volume training is because you think that the real definition of volume is sets and reps. But in reality, it is not. It is time under meaningful load, or effort over time. And when you train this way properly and you do sets that last about 1 to 2 minutes, and by the way, this is the way that you should perform your sets when you are training this way, your time under load will be the same as people who are doing, you know, 3 to 5 conventional sets. Most people who train in the gym, who do multiple sets and perform them, conventionally with, a fast, pretty Yankee cadence, not very controlled, not very slow, their sets last about 20 seconds on average. And I've done this. I've timed people in the gym when they perform their sets, and almost every single time their sets last about around 20 seconds. So when you're doing an exercise, when you're doing a set where the set lasts about 1 to 2 minutes, you can imagine that one set that lasts, 1.5 minutes, that is the equivalent of most people's, 5 sets. And so this approach actually is not low volume. Sometimes it can even end up being more volume than most people who do multiple sets are doing. But the difference is, instead of dividing that volume into 3 or 4 or 5 different sets, we just do one prolonged set and achieve the same volume, or sometimes even more, in one single set. And there's a lot of advantages to this. The biggest one, in my opinion, being it's very, very time efficient. You save a lot of time. My workouts usually last about 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour max. And I train about 3 to 2 times a week. And so I save a lot of time. If I was training the conventional way, which I have been doing in the past, I wouldn't have time to make these videos. Or at least I would have way less time to make these videos, because I would have been spending probably 3 to 4 fucking 5 hours in the gym instead of just my 1.5 to 2 hours a week that I usually spend. And so I would encourage you to try training this way, even if you are skeptical of it, because why wouldn't you try out an exercise protocol that saves you time? Hours of time, by the way. Time is the most valuable resource we have. We can never get it back when we have used it. The worst thing that could happen is that it doesn't work and you just go back to how you were training before if you were training the conventional way. And the best thing that could happen is that it does work, which I can promise you it will do if you do correctly, and you will save so much time and you will have so much more time to do other stuff that is more productive. Another benefit being it does not beat up your joints as much as conventional training does, because you're not doing a bunch of sets with a bunch of repetitions, and especially you're not doing them quick like this, like most people are doing it. No, you do one set with slow and controlled repetitions. I generally recommend at least 4 seconds up on the lifting phase and then 4 seconds down on the lowering phase, with slow changes in directions, which means that you are having very low peak forces when you're doing your exercises, which minimizes the risk of injury and also minimizes the wear and tear on your joints. And also, it's usually easier to keep the correct form when you're performing your repetitions slowly, because you can all the time keep track of what you're doing much easier, and you can notice if you're starting to move out of position. Now, an important thing to note when you train this way, which you probably obviously realized already because I'm talking about doing one set to failure, is when you train this way and you do it properly, you won't be able to do as many sets. But that's okay, because like I explained, this approach isn't actually low volume, and you still have the same, if not more time under load than most people do when they do their exercises and their sets. But what a lot of people do is they adjust and they cut back on the intensity in order to accommodate for more volume and more frequency, but you want to do the opposite. You want to have the intensity and you want to structure your volume and your frequency around the intensity, so you can always have that intensity in your workouts. And so when you train this way, you might sometimes notice that you have to decrease your frequency and also decrease the amount of exercises you do per body part. But that's fine, because you don't really need more than 1, maybe 2 exercises per muscle group for optimal development. If the exercise addresses one of the functions or one of the main functions of the muscle group that you're targeting, and you perform it correctly to failure, then you have stimulated that muscle group and you don't need to do anymore. And so adding more frequency or adding more extra exercises to a specific body part or all of your body parts isn't going to increase your results. The only thing that you are doing is digging a deeper hole into your recoverability, and having so your body has to use more of its limited resources towards recovery, so it has less over for adaptation or, building the muscle. And also with the frequency, there seems to be this weird obsession that a lot of people have with, cramming in as many workouts as they possibly can per week, with the erroneous assumption that that will increase the rate of their progress or, give them way better gains. But if you look at the research, workout frequency doesn't have a lot of effect on your results. Now, if you go from maybe 1 time to 2 times a week, then yes, then according to the research, the difference in your results is going to be somewhat more significant. But if the maximum you can train is 3 times a week and you go to 2 times a week instead, the difference in your results is only going to be a few percent. And also keep in mind that no matter how frequently you can train, as long as you are training, so frequently that you're not losing muscle in between workouts, which you're probably not going to, because you're not going to be training like every 3 months or whatever. And so no matter if you train once a week or 3 times a week or 2 times a week or once every other week, at the end of the day, it's all going to get you to the exact same place, which is your genetic potential of how much muscle you can possibly build. Yo boys, this is Editing Alphonse here. I just realized there was something I wanted to add to this regarding frequency. And yes, by the way, I'm filming this on my laptop, which is why the picture quality is absolute shit. But regarding frequency, your frequency that you're able to train at is going to be entirely dependent on your individual recoverability. Some people just recover and adapt in between workouts way faster than other people do, and some people take much longer. And so the way you find out the best frequency for you is by keeping accurate charts of your workouts or accurate records of your workouts. And you do this, you can look back at your workouts and look at how good progress you were making, or if you were making any progress at all on a certain workout program with a certain frequency. And so then you can use that information in order to adjust your volume and your frequency to fit you more precisely, more perfectly. Also, another good rule of thumb to have regarding frequency is to never train 2 days in a row. Unless you are enhanced and are on a shit ton of steroids, I would never recommend you train 2 days in a row, because for 99.99% of people, for almost everybody, that is not going to be enough recovery time in between your workouts in order for you to be able to recover and adapt in between the workouts, given that you're doing the workouts properly with adequate intensity. But anyways boys, that's all I had to say. Editing Alphonse out. Now before I end this video, I know the final thing you're probably thinking about is, well, is there any research behind this type of training? And yes, there is. You would be surprised to actually see that if you read the research, the vast majority of research that compares single to multiple set training shows that there is no benefit to doing more than 1 set. And this is very against what a lot of us people hear, because nowadays most of the studies that are made with the assumption that you are doing multiple sets. But the majority of the studies that compare single and multiple set training show that there's actually no benefit to performing more than 1 set, given that it's taken to failure. But that is all for this video. I hope you guys liked it and I hope you guys found it useful. If you want me to explain any of these things that I've talked about in this video in more detail, then don't hesitate to ask questions in the comments. And yeah, I hope you liked this video. If you did, don't forget to click the like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And with that being said, I'll see you boys in the next video next time. Peace.